the Know Your Gear podcast.
Today's podcast is a bonus podcast, and I have a guest joining me. I have Jon Gundry from Throbak Pickups. Now, if you don't know who Jon Gundry is, he's an expert when it comes to the P.A.F pickup and all of the versions of the P.A.F pickup. You heard me right, there's versions. In fact, 4 different machines made the P.A.F pickup, and he has a version of each one of those machines at his shop. In fact, Paul, who works at his shop, may be the only person left on the entire planet Earth that can operate all 4 machines. He goes to extreme details to recreate every component that's in the P.A.F pickup. Now, this leads to a pickup that's 10 times more expensive than the average aftermarket pickup. But here's what's great. He's on the show because he has a YouTube channel, I'll put a link down below, and a website where he freely shares every piece of information, including reverse engineering the original P.A.F pickups, explaining all the components, where he gets them, how to source them, and if you want to build them yourself, he says you're welcome to do it. In fact, he encourages it.
Today's episode of the Know Your Gear podcast is brought to you by Patreon members, channel members, and viewers who like and subscribe. Thank you for making this possible.
When I first started making pickups, it was a hodgepodge. There was no one source that you could get the bobbins, base plates for, for instance, a humbucker. There was no place, if you wanted an accurate PAF spec, there was no one who did a dead-on accurate PAF spec part set that you could buy. The very first ones I did, I had to use a bobbins from All Parts and base plates from All Parts, but then I had to adapt a StewMac keeper bar to work with it, and then I had to source screws from someplace else and magnets, of course, from somewhere else. So and then the strange thing about it is the All Parts bobbins didn't really fit the All Parts base plates well. And so at some point I realized if I'm going to get the specs I want, but also have a well-assembled pickup, I have to start getting the parts made. There wasn't any Mojo Tone making parts at the time for them. The only other person that I know that was doing butyrate bobbins, I think, was Bare Knuckle, and he had at the time, I think, was Seymour Duncan also, but like the dimensions of a P.A.F pickup, and he was using at the time a mold that he had purchased from someone else. But I thought, if I want the right specs, I've got to have them made. So I got a plastic molder here locally to do the bobbins. And I'm in Grand Rapids, Michigan. So some of the shops that used to do things for Gibson are still around here in West Michigan. So I found the place that used to make base plates for Gibson when they were in Kalamazoo. And they didn't want to take that job on, but they directed me to another place that could. So eventually, I got all of this stuff sourced in the Midwest.
Well,
and
hold on, I want to pause.
Okay,
because we might lose people. So let's start with, because I'm going to tell you right now, because there's some guys right now just loving this and eating this up what you're saying, but there's some that are just like, now you're, So let's just talk about the butyrate. Because you said that. So explain what that is and why that's relevant to the bobbin in any way. If you could.
Okay. Well, it's called, the bobbin plastic material is called CAB, which is an acronym for cellulose acetate butyrate. It's just the mix of the plastic. And it is, in fact, the plastic that is peculiar to P.A.F pickup bobbins. Now it would be some sort of polycarbonate for a mass-produced pickup, but cellulose acetate butyrate is what they use. So this is one of these specs of a vintage P.A.F that is a signature of them. It has a weird smell. It does. I don't claim there to be any difference in how it makes the pickup sound, but it's one of these things that is associated with the construction of it. And there is one thing that I think may make a difference, is that since it's a different material and a P.A.F pickup is unpotted, not wax potted, every component has a mechanical resonance. And using a different bobbin material, in my way of thinking, with the violin mind of making sort of mind that I went into this with, was that even though it's a small detail, that difference in mechanical properties, since there is this mechanical component to an unwax potted humbucker pickup, that plastic material would make a difference. So in the upshot of this is now it's kind of considered, butyrate plastic is kind of considered a not obsolete kind of plastic, but not used very often. So in order for me to get the parts made, I have to buy 600 pounds of it at a time. But that's what, and again, it started with me having another business where I could like entertain these ideas that would just be like a non-starter for any other small guy.
Now you have those made here in the States?
I have them made at I have a plastic molder in Mendon, Michigan, which is just south of Kalamazoo. I'm about an hour north of Kalamazoo, and yeah, he's a very good plastic molder, and he made a. I actually gave him some old P.A.F. bobbins, and he could tell just by looking at it what the mold was like. In fact, he explained the numbers that are inside the bobbin. There's numbers, sort of a part number, but there's also a mold chamber number. There's four. If you repair enough P.A.F. pickups, you realize that there's four different kinds of bobbins, and they're labeled 1, 2, 3, and 4. Well, that's because the original mold was a 4-chamber mold. So there's these little details like this that I wouldn't even be aware of if I hadn't gotten the parts made.
Right.
So there's a practical standpoint to a lot of these things that are evident to the plastic molder, but as the pickup aficionado, you might not know. But just the process of getting all these parts made educated me as to what went into making them, but also it kind of revealed little different parts of the process industrially, I guess, of
Sure.
Gibson when they had these made. And a few of these things have a little bit of impact, I think, on the finished pickup. And if you get all of those done, I think you can have a more accurate reproduction, which is why I think it's been a real advantage for us having our own parts.
I love that you're just like, I don't know if the plastic has a tone in it. You know, it's funny because
Yeah,
I always think of the internet and how they were going to react to anything. But on the note that's interesting to me is one of the things I learned from you, the nickel covers originally were much flatter on the
yeah.
top. What was interesting is why that's important because of the air gap that can get in there. Doesn't it kind of tell you that they had put thought into everything a little bit? I mean, obviously they must have thought about
Yeah.
these things, why they were doing them. And there's a reason why they're doing, and a reason why now manufacturers decided some of those things don't matter, or they can work around that.
Yeah, I think from a practical standpoint, it's they must have had some knowledge that if it's flatter, it's less likely to feed back. One interesting thing about the covers is I believe there were two manufacturers for them, but I know one was in Grand Rapids and it was a place called Johnson Metal. I know that because one of the buffers we use, his dad used to do all the buffing for Gibson, and he said that's where the parts came from. So all these weird details just being around here that I've kind of stumbled across. But yeah, I'm sure a lot of these things, a lot of these details, there was thought into it, and I think that my feeling is that initially the thought was what will satisfy our customers and what will allow us to make something that gets us what we want tonally, sonically out of it. And then I think, like any manufacturer, a lot of these details got tweaked to be more efficient. And so by the time you get to a T-top, there's a fair amount of difference in the construction and materials that go into it. But I think really the focus on of a lot of that was efficiency with an eye on keeping the costs down, which is normal for a large company. Because what I think about too, I've thought about how do I articulate this to people. A place like Gibson, they're making everything at scale, large scale. So initially, they might have had a process for a P.A.F. that worked for them, but as a year, 2, 3 goes on, they're going to just automatically get machines that work faster, change processes that will speed up the labor time that goes into it. But what I can do is I can focus on doing details at a scale that isn't realistic for someone who's doing production at scale. And that's part of why we have to charge more.
I believe not in every case, not everything is so like a broad stroke, but a lot of cases in the music industry, a lot of things that were made way back then can be made now if you truly want them. And sometimes that gets confused. It happens with the internet. People think I don't like vintage guitars or something. It's like, it's not that. I'm just saying, if you're coveting this guitar that costs more than a sports car, right? There are things that people like you can do to recreate pretty much a lot of what they were doing back then. Because to your point, like, look, you had to have your own molds done. You had to have your own screws done. And I don't mean to take this away from anybody out there. So anyone out there, that if you're a pickup builder and you want to put comments in this later and say, no, I do. I haven't found anybody who's buying USA made magnets. Um,
I I know Tom Holmes used to. He may still. The only reason I know that is one of the suppliers I use. Just through deduction, I realized, oh, this they had another pickup maker using the same type of magnet. They could provide a sample, and I'm pretty sure it was Tom Holmes. I actually think it's like the best time for guitars to get a really great deal on a really great guitar, and pickups too. There's not any reason you can't make a great sounding pickup with overseas parts. And if it's an important difference to people who are looking for that spec, I want to provide it, but I also want to be very upfront about, what it takes for us to do that, which is why we do videos and try to explain as much of that as possible, because it is a lot of money, but I want people to know what they're getting.
so that was my first, kind of like experience with expensive instruments. Was not an expensive instrument. It was an expensive pickup. And if you think about it, most guitar players, that's their first experience. Like most guitar players aren't going to say like, "Hey, I got a $4,000 guitar," but most
Yeah,
guitar players are going to tell you that they got an inexpensive like $200 guitar, but they said put $100 pickup in it, and they're like,
yeah,
"Wow." That experience of like, wow, I've really upgraded this. I liken it to like, my friends in high school back in the day when they would soup up the engines in their cars, right? I'm going to make the
yeah.
engine better in the car, and therefore the car will do something that it didn't do before. And pickups to me, what I loved about pickups when I first started like paying attention to them a long time ago was relatively, even though yours are, more on the expensive side for sure, relatively, yeah, if you look at a little piece of plastic and like this big and go, wow, that's a lot of money. But I mean, relatively speaking, if we walk in a music store and look at prices of things, the pickups are not hugely expensive comparatively. But what's great is they don't go bad. I mean, you got to really want to kill a pickup to kill a pickup.
Yeah, well,
Um,
except last year I got a fair amount of double white pickups, vintage ones that are going bad. Leaving the pickup uncovered, especially a P.A.F, is not a good idea. But go on with what you were saying. I'll
well,
give you more.
so here's what I would attribute that to.
Yeah,
They're not wax potted.
that's one important
And so
detail.
the wire, which is a human hair, right? So the
Yeah,
wire is so thin, and I mean, that's one of the things I like about wax potting a pickup. It's not even I don't play loud arenas. So like when people are like, my pickups are squealing, I'm like, I'm not standing in front of a Marshall. Like a pickup squealing is not something I truly experience on my day-to-day playing experience. But wax potting, it just makes me feel like it's good. It's stuck together now, right?
yeah,
Like
it
yeah,
does have a solid. It actually strangely feels solid. Yeah,
yeah. It's like
yeah,
yeah, like a brick of soap, right?
yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
so but I understand what you're saying. But even I would say, even if you're seeing a lot of them, I'm just talking about like, what would
Oh,
those odds be? It's not 10% of pickups go
no,
bad. Yeah,
no,
yeah.
no. But what's interesting, these are I'm going to do a video about this because, yeah, I kind of had this revelation last year. I kind of put this together with repairing enough of them. A lot of double cream pickups are obviously hotter, so they're overwound to an extent that there's just barely covering the tape.
Yes.
And even if, let's say, the pickup's 8.1K, there may be one coil that is much more overwound than the other. The problem with leaving the cover off is the tape that is used for the coils. They don't make it anymore, and it has very tenacious adhesive. When you're repairing one, you have to, if you're going to reuse the tape, you have to remove it carefully, and then you have to retape it pretty quickly because the adhesive will basically turn into varnish.
Yeah.
It'll get completely hard. So if you have the cover off, and there now becomes a little gap just because these coils are loosely wound or very fully wound with magnet wire. If you have the cover off, inevitably there's going to develop a little gap along the long edge of the pickup coil tape. And
Yeah.
then you get a little air under there, sweat, whatever. Very often that tape now loses its adhesive properties, and these overwound coils, they'll show up with wire laying on top of the coil.
I don't know the vintage pickup world very much, so I don't know. Is the tape a paper based or is it a nylon based
Yeah,
tape like
no,
now?
yeah, it's a paper-based tape. So it's a 3M. One of the details you can kind of check to spot a possible fake is the tape that is used on a vintage P90 or P.A.F. The fibers of the paper fibers are black. The outside of it is varnished, is flat varnished paper, and the adhesive is also black. And that black adhesive, so if you've got the adhesive on your fingers, it'll be black, be black goo on it. So if you have a pickup that you think might be vintage and it doesn't have that type of tape on it, then it's either been rewound or it's entirely a fake. But that black adhesive, when it's exposed to air, I assume this is just really a fact of it having been, the age of the tape. I've got pieces of tape over there that I've taken off of repairs. It's like varnish. It's totally loses its ability to stick to anything, and it's shiny, the adhesive side of it. So there's no equivalent tape right now that is like it. But so the irony of this is the most desirable collectible pickup is now has this shortened lifespan for the very reason it's very desirable and collectible. The people don't want the cover on. So
Yeah, well, that was, we all do what our idols do, and so many of those
yeah,
idols, especially, in that time where we're yanking the covers off, because the theory was if you yank the cover off, you could get more high frequencies or more, just more. The word is just
yeah,
more. That's all that matters. Just get more to the amp, and this gave them more to the amp, and then it also made them stand out as looking different, right? Because the pickups look different than all the other, on the wall of the music store Les Pauls and
yeah.
stuff.
The
So
interesting thing, I actually ran across uh, a video of Jeff Beck playing his Oxblood Les Paul before he took the covers off,
oh,
and it actually I think sounds better with the covers on. It's a sweeter sound. It's a much sort of like in your face attack with the cover off, which is what I would expect, but it's a sweeter tone with the covers on.
it's tough because everybody's going to have a little bit of different, what they perceive. But to me, I pick things just on looks. Like I'll go, oh, okay, this looks like it should have nickel covers, and
Yeah,
that looks like it should have, plastic bobbin covers or plastic bobbins. And I don't really know because I'll just make the adjustment of the amp, But what's nice is because I have the Somnium guitar where I get to swap pickups all the time, and swapping pickups all the time. What I learned is everything is true. Like if you take a neck pickup out of the guitar and you throw it, and you have just one bridge pickup, it does sustain just a little bit more, right? But all of these things are so small,
oh
right?
yeah,
That you can understand when, and I kind of try to not live when I do this stuff, I don't live in the now because the now is easy. The now is I got plugins and EQs and nice mixers and nice amplifiers, right? I try to live in the then and in the past. And in the past, when you had an amp with only, if you were lucky, you had a mid-range control, right? Some amps
yeah,
just, you had some amps just a fixed mid-range sound, and then of course your bass and treble. When you're trying to get that last bit of highs out, or the last bit of bass out, or the last bit of distortion out, or the last bit of everything, I could see why everything mattered, even if it was so small. And I think that's part of the fun of it, chasing that still to
Yeah.
this day. So I see both sides. So when somebody says, "Oh, it doesn't matter," I go, "I can see that now. It doesn't matter." But I also see why it's so much fun to figure it out. And
Yeah.
right. And it's just there's just something about, it's why I still watch Westerns. I just, there's just something about, the past. It's a romantic.
Yeah, the kind of a similar thing that happened recently was we now offer a no caster style and broadcaster Alnico 3 style pickup. And I realized, so Alnico 3 magnets, and again, we had these custom made, and to get the full variety to do a Telecaster and Strat, it cost us 30 grand to do it. But I realized that the Gauss is about half what A5 would be in a rod magnet. And I realized though, oh, this is why people love like EMG. It's like it's easier to get pinch harmonics out of the weaker magnet. So that was another one of those things, like beyond the difference in the metal, that contributes to the pickup. Um, and Alnico 3, I think one reason people like those very early Telecasters is it's easier to get pinch harmonics out of. You listen to Roy Buchanan, that's part of it.
Oh,
His style is kind of very full of uh, uh, kind of things that are on the edge of pinch harmonics, and it comes out just that one change. You feel it as a player, that difference in the magnet.
I got obsessed for a while with like how cheap can I get a pickup? Like where can I find the cheap? Because you can find pickups for $8. I've been to the factory where they make an $8 pickup, which is just crazy to watch.
Well, again, it's making them at scale.
Not only the scale though, think about this, not only the scale, because if you watch them do it, and this is where it gets fun, they create a problem and they solve it. So let's say
Yeah,
they use a big O ceramic magnet and it just creates all this this is them. I've explained it, but it was them explaining it to me. They're like, and it creates all this high frequency uh, but the highs, specifically the high frequency is not the problem. It's an unpleasant tone, especially when you add distortion, which is just going to exaggerate certain tones. And then to see them go, but this was great. Like they were excited about this problem because here's why. To fix it, they need to dull how much of that magnetic energy gets to the string, right?
yeah.
So they did that by essentially making the slugs less metal. Does it make sense? I'm
Yes,
just
and
using Jared Turner. Yeah.
yeah, and this is a cost savings in the long run.
Right,
Yeah,
right, right.
yeah,
So when somebody says, because they do, because there's all kinds of players and no one's wrong. I never look at that one player's wrong and one player's right. I just look at it like, hey, what fits your needs and what are you looking for? And the real and to me, the only thing I'll never understand to this day is that they don't have an obsession, right? Like if somebody tells me they're obsessed with $99 guitars, I'm like, I totally understand you. Like we're friends, we're kindred. I'm not obsessed with them, but I understand obsession. Okay,
yeah,
right? I
yeah.
just don't understand when people don't understand the obsessive part. But to me, it's like when somebody says, "Hey, this $8 pickup sounds good," I'm like, "It does," because that's the baseline now. The baseline is it functions.
Yeah.
You know, uh, uh,
Well, the experience I've had with this was with rod magnets, and I hadn't checked the last time I bought overseas made magnets was, I think, probably 2008, 2009, and the reason I switched to USA made is that I didn't the consistency of what I was getting from overseas parts was so bad that I was sent two different batches of magnets that wouldn't magnetize. And I thought, I can't rely upon that. So I'm going to give USA made magnets a shot, even if they cost more. I revisited this with Alnico 3 rod magnets, and now the price disparity is 15 times for rod magnets. I think it's about 11 for bar magnets. I think because there's just more machine time in a rod magnet. But so I'm paying 15 times more for the USA made magnet than overseas. I have the Blackguard book, and I thought, like, what was Leo Fender probably paying for these things? Because there's a data sheet in there or there's a cost breakdown in that is in his handwriting. If you do if you run that through an inflation calculator and just kind of guess as to what his price break probably is for the quantity he was buying, it's about in line with inflation now, what I'm paying for 15 times more. I figure that the quantity he was ordering, he probably was getting another 15 to 20% off for the larger quantities. And that would put it right in line if you run his old price through an inflation calculator to what it would cost today. So related to that, I ordered some overseas made magnets, and they were very consistent. But I was told by two different sources that they're using the one way to keep the cost down is by adding iron as a
Yeah.
filler material.
Yeah.
And and if that's true, which I think it probably is, it shows up in the results that I A/B'd against them in that there's a pretty big inductance difference from the magnets between the USA made vintage spec stuff and the overseas. So they're they've solved a problem of cost,
Right.
and they're producing something that works very well, but it's not the same spec as the old stuff. And it's not that it sounds bad compared to the old stuff, but it's different. It's absolutely different. And so again, those differences, I think I want to get the different, since we're making reproduction, I don't want those differences. And for this is another advantage of using USA made stuff, but it's also, it kind of exposes why that's well, it's not exposed, it makes it sound like it's some criminal thing, but it's obvious why if someone making pickups at scale would really have to use that if there's that price difference. And yeah, I think the manufacturers solved the problem of cost, and it's sort of become the industry standard.
So I know one thing you do besides pickups, you sell parts. You sell some of your parts, right?
Yeah, we sell some parts really just because, like, we sell P90 bobbins and base plates. I make those, but I price them high enough just to be available for anybody who's a pickup maker that, let's say, has to restore a P90 and they want the dimensionally correct part. Because I don't know anybody else. At the time, there wasn't anybody else making one that you could buy. Because I was getting requests from pickup makers, hey, can I buy them? And I thought, well, I'll make it easy for people that are in that situation and put them on the website. Covers too.
Things that make you unique. You're very open with not only the information, but also, where your materials come from, what you're doing. Everybody is either super proud, they can't wait to show you how they make something, what they make it out of, or it is behind the green curtain. It's the Oz. It's the great,
Oh,
Oz. You're never
yeah.
going to see. Like, it's a magic. I find it's thrown around a lot. Like, we can't, it's a proprietary secret to know where we get, we don't want you to know our suppliers. We don't want to know anything. And here's what's funny I've learned, and I say this, and this is just my honest opinion. What I've learned is the people who use the best components, the best parts, and which then translates to expensive suppliers, they don't fear telling anybody because I'm not saying, they know it, but they know the other competitors aren't going to use those suppliers. They're not going to use that. They're not going to go down the road you're going because it is super expensive and it puts you in a very unique price bracket, right? Which takes, and this is the important part, and I'll say this just so the audience knows, you have to educate yourself to buy a throwback pickup. If you buy it and put it in your guitar, the results will be, oh, it sounds great. That's great. But I mean, if you want to understand the pricing, you need to take some time. I would watch at least 3 or 4 of John's videos where he's either breaks down, he's got videos where he breaks down each component, like he disassembles the pickup. He's got videos where he's essentially giving away what is really probably the hardest thing. He's the $30,000, to buy stuff and 600 pounds of plastic. That's not the hard. The hard is your knowledge, the amount of information you've accumulated, and that you actually give that to people. That's giving away a lot of value that people probably should take the opportunity to learn with.
I want people to know what they're getting, from since all of these details go into what we make. I don't feel like having them sort of secretly have them be a secret is useful to the person buying it. And I mean, honestly, I'm making a reproduction. right? So it's not like I've been very meticulously gone about making reproduction, but I didn't make the original. Some of these things, if another pickup maker decides they want to do it, well, then I won't be the only guy buying, USA main magnets, and they'll, maybe they'll have I mean, they like to sell them to me, and it's a big cash outlay for me, but it's not going to hurt me for there to be another reliable customer for one of my suppliers. And the other part of it is there are capabilities that we have that are unique to us. Seymour Duncan does have a lease on a 102 out of the Gibson factory, and Gibson does still use Meteor machines that they owned in Kalamazoo. But we have those machines, and then we have two machine models that no one has. So there, if you combine that, we have a capability to wind a pickup in a way that no one else has. It's reassuring for me to know that we have this unique capability, but the irony of it is very often good information advice gets completely ignored, is in my experience with it. So it's like, well, I could help someone else, and what's that hurt? And if people get to decide whether or not the information's useful. But strangely, I think often if your kind of worry is the competitors, you might be helping out a competitor. I think very often people are very so set in what their routine is that it's very hard to get them to change anyway. So anyway, that's been my experience with sharing information. I think it really helps the customer out. I do want people to know what we make. And the other part of it is it's not a real big universe for pickup makers. And if there's something that a competitor finds helpful and that they might want to reciprocate to me when I have some need, that's I think how a competitive business should work.
One of the things that became hard for me is a YouTube channel, which translates to the consumer. This is the problem, right? Is that when I get a product, the whole concept of a review is a silly idea, right? Like I'm going to look at a thing and then tell you my opinion of it, and like who the hell cares, right? But here's what's important, though. I find more and more the things that don't cost money to the companies now all of a sudden are very valuable. And things that cost money to companies, well, that didn't really matter actually if you think about it.
Yes, because yeah, that makes sense. I mean, I've actually worked with doing photography. I've worked with my fair share of marketing and advertising people, and there's definitely that part of it.
Obviously, people covet the original pickups that are in these original guitars. There's no question of that. It's not just rock stars, it's everybody. It's like half the industry is built on replicating a thing from the past.
Yeah.
And what I find funny is then you have someone like you who's like, okay, I'm gonna super nerd that. I'm gonna replicate it. Like I said, one of the craziest thing you've done that actually makes me kind of chuckle when I look at everything you've done. You had the screws made. You may not understand this, or maybe you do. No one would know.
No. I've got 4 variations of screws, and I actually ordered some more, and they're fine. And I'm probably going to. I found another screw manufacturer that I think I may prefer, and it's not what I ordered is problematic. I like for myself, I think I could improve upon it. So I'm actually right now in the process of so I'll have 6 varieties. So actually, when you talk about sort of, I have a theory as to why this stuff appeals to me. I think this applies towards vintage guitars or just older stuff in general. It's a way of honoring a level of handwork that by using it and having it and appreciating it, that is not as common as it once was. And that the object itself, the guitar itself, it somehow exudes that. And I feel the same way about using the old machines we use. I feel like keeping them running, using them the way they were set up to do. It's in a way, it's it's a way of honoring people that had to feed their families using these things. It might not have been what they would have chose to do on a sunny day. The motivation for doing it, I have to assume, was out of basically a love for what at least the results would bring to them. And that using it, keeping them running is a somehow way of honoring, in using them for what we make is a way of honoring people that used them in the past. This may be way overthinking this. This is really, because I thought about this. It's like, why am I attracted to this sort of detail and trying to recreate something? And why do people like it? I think that's part of it. Not only is let's say a vintage guitar or P.A.F pickups, not as there only is there scarcity built into it because of its age, and that there were only so many made then, but the way of making them is more and more scarce. With these older methods and just amount of handwork.
The thing with this, I actually internally was chuckling when you said this cost. You made a point about the cost being $30,000, and to give people scale of that, I've interviewed so many people. I've talked to so many people in this industry. I've heard companies that can do, I don't know, $100 million a year in sales, and they will make a decision to not do something over $30,000. Isn't that funny?
Yeah, the two. I have 3 versions of Alnico rod magnets. So multiply that times 3. That 30,000, multiply that by 3 in order for me to have the full variety of sizes for 2 different varieties of Alnico 5, all USA made, and one of Alnico 3. It's nuts, honestly, when I think about it. But I mean, it works, and I don't have to like buy them all on the same day. But yeah, I mean, that's just the reality of it's a different model than what they're going to do.
Last section. So I know you guys, you don't make strings, but you have strings.
No.
Okay, you have them made for you.
Yep. So I went to the guys that make our strings, and I said, "Can you? I'd like to make a pure nickel round core electric guitar string." And they initially refused because in their mind this is a flaw, because everything now is hex core, but most everybody. And I had to convince them. I said, no, I think there's a market for it. So, well, you'd have to buy the material, and I said, okay. And the upshot of it is the pure nickel round core, machine pure nickel round core strings are our biggest seller. So, and then pure nickel hex core. But it's another sort of example of sort of an old manufacturing process that is now, I guess, in their mind, it's obsolete, right? Because the hex core solves a problem. The risk of a round core string is that if you trim it improperly, it can go dead because you don't have that hex core stabilizing the lines up the length of the string.
Oh,
see what I mean?
Yeah.
So to make them, there's an extra step to make a round core string, is they have to take the core wire and then they put a flat at the end of it, and that flat, so they run it through a machine to squish the core wire so that the end of the wrap wire can bite into that. That stabilizes the whole thing. But when you cut it off, that stabilization of that end piece that's been flattened goes away. So you have to, the solution for this is you have to bend the wire. I've done a video on this. So you bend the wire, you trim it at a little bit of an angle, and you don't have the problem of the string going dead. But in the string industry, this was a repeat problem, because if it's not trimmed properly, you have complaints.
Yeah, people think I'm crazy whenever I talk about restringing a guitar when they have a problem. I'm like, well, restring your guitar again. And then I think they look at me like an IT guy telling them to reboot their computer, like I'm being lazy. And I'm like, no, look, improper string installment is a thing. It happens all the time.
Yeah, I actually think that this is I think this is the origin of the luthier's knot. Is that this is a foolproof way to prevent the string growing dead when you have round core strings, because it doubles over on itself, and and it's trimmed usually after the guitar is under tension.
Right.
But it's not the most efficient way to do it,
No.
and you don't need to do it with hex core. So, but I wanted to offer the round core pure nickel strings because there weren't I think the choices for pure nickel are at the time were DR, which they're hand wrapped,
Yeah.
triangle, I believe, and those are hand wound also. GHS has nickel rockers, but those are like a half flat round.
Yeah.
It's another one of these things that's counterintuitive. The thing that once was, there's a market for, but the market went away, but the product went away because the people making it saw the original spec as a problem.
Speaking of GHS, there was a lady, she might be still there, I don't know. There was a lady named Beth there, and she once told me, the guitar picks the strings, not the player. I thought it was an interesting statement. She said, and I, up until that point, it's one of those things, like it was just rattled in my head. Well, right? The guitar picks the strings. Interesting. Like not even explaining the logic of it, just like thinking about it, where before, up until that moment, everything in my brain said, this is the gauge type brand string I like. And then I put that on everything, right?
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden I go, yeah, I do have a guitar. I don't like the way it plays. We're not even talking about gauge. This is just talking about like you said, there's a difference in the way strings are made. And so one of the things, besides a lot of things I've adopted, is all of my vintage-esque guitars. I don't have any true vintage guitars, but like vintage-esque reissues. I was like, yeah, why don't I throw nickels on them and see what happens? I mean, that's what they were designed with, right?
Yeah.
And if the pickups are replicating, or the pickups are trying to be a replica of an original pickup, and the guitars are, right, like, why not put an original string? And one thing I know about guitar players that I just absolutely adore the hell out of, which is the fact that for $1, they'll just not do something, right? Like if a pack of strings is $1 more, like that's just, they're not going to do that. And I always laugh going, but they will literally change everything. They'll spend $1,000 to accomplish a task that maybe $1 would have done, right? $1 more, right? And I love putting pure nickel strings or on like anything that's like a P.A.F style pickup. To me, strats like this Strat right here, with vintage set of style pickups in it, I put nickels on that, and then literally the things I didn't like maybe before, like to me, it softened that Strat so much.
Yeah, I think I realized this in high school, but didn't really figure out why I preferred different brands. I preferred, for a Strat, I preferred what are they even called? I think they were called 150 XLs or something. But I think maybe I tried them because Eddie Van Halen used them or something. But they're pure nickel, and I thought like this is actually, and I'd try like Diodarius on them, and I like there's something like harsh about it now. Right, there's some chunky thing going on, and then I realized now, well, it's the Fender ones were pure nickel, and then also I used Dean Markley's strings also, and I think the ones I was using, those were round core, right? So yeah, I do, and my most recent instance of the guitar picking the strings, not the player. I prefer hex core pure nickel strings for a Strat or a Telecaster if it's got Alnico 5. But for if you're using an Alnico 3 broadcaster and no-caster pickup, you get a little extra signal. What I tell people about output of a pickup is that it's a combination of the strength of the magnet and the winds on the pickup. So a higher resistance is going to give you a less headroom with a low wattage amp than a lower resistance pickup will give you more headroom. But also the strength of the magnet has that same effect. A stronger magnet is going to give you less headroom with a lower wattage amp. A weaker magnet will give you a little bit more headroom. But Alnico 3 and something like a no-caster or a broadcaster pickup, the extra getting a nickel wound, which is really nickel plated steel, but in the guitar string world, nickel wound means nickel plated steel. Using those with an A3 broadcaster, no caster pickup, you get just a little extra signal off the wound strings, and that to me is right for the guitar. So if someone gets one of our Strat sets of pickups, though with Alnico 5, will send a pure nickel hex core set with it, because that's what I think is the right strings for that style of guitar and pickup. But
Sure.
if they get her Nocaster, I'm going to send the nickel plated steel strings, because I think that style of guitar with those pickups, it does, the guitar does pick those strings. So yeah, it's personalized, but there is definitely something to the guitar needing a certain string if you're going for
Oh,
what's optimum from the guitar.
so when you think of the string manufacturers and the pickup manufacturers, you think, interesting enough, you'd think they would discuss each other more. What's funny about pickup manufacturers now is when you read the ad copy, like it's just this garble of statements, right? Where I would love it if it said, "Hey, this pickup pairs well with a thicker gauge string, and this
Yeah,
pickup pairs well with like a brighter string or a softer string, and like a nickel string versus a steel string." I mean, obviously, both these entities, the pickup manufacturer, which is obviously you, and the string manufacturer, understand this concept because you have companies like Ernie Ball specifically going, "Here, here's Cobalt. This is going to be really bright." And you're
yeah.
like, "Okay, cool." But you would think, and I know what it is. I have the answer, which is why I hate it. The answer is they're never going to say ever something is not good for something, because
Yeah.
then that, right, they want the idea that this is good for everything.
Yes, it's why you don't sell. It's someone told me it's the same reason you don't sell vegetable wash in the vegetable section, because it implies that the produce you're buying is dirty.
Yes. Yeah.
I've got another like sort of theory, is that the reason the frets are so tiny on like a vintage Les Paul, like a 52 Les Paul. I've got a couple of guitars that have the tiny frets, and if you play them with like lights, you're like, I can't stand this. But if you put mediums on them, you're like, oh, I think I get it. It actually plays easily. My fingers aren't scraped. The extra thickness of the string. So I had a guitar. Well, I have a refinished Les Paul Special, and I'm like, I don't want to refret it. Like the frets are like new on it, but they're the original frets. And I thought I don't want to have to refret it. So I thought I'll just try some heavy strings on it, and it's fine. It's a different tone. It's harder to bend, but I kind of think that this may be why they're small. People were using a thicker gauge string,
And a wound
but if
G string on top of that. So it was more
yeah,
like an acoustic, right?
yeah, and then
Because
yeah, go ahead.
oh no, just because originally, I mean, I don't remember. Somebody could Google it. I don't remember when the plain G string popped up, but it wasn't. It was at least a decade, at least into the electric guitar's lifespan.
Yeah, yeah, I think
Um,
people were taking a banjo string and like shifting the whole set or something, and so they
yeah,
could have a plain third. Yeah,
yeah. So I think your theory is absolutely makes sense to me. That yeah, if you had vintage fret wire on a guitar, but everybody was probably playing at that time a much thicker string. They can, of course, because I don't know about you, since it's good. Glad you pointed this out. This is something else that's funny. I go up a gauge from my normal gauge when I go pure nickel. So if I play
okay,
nine steel or nickel wrap steel strings, if I put pure nickels on, like that Strat
yeah,
that has tens.
yeah. Well, that would
Well,
make sense because it is a little softer, and you get a little bit more, I guess, string tension on it to kind of
yes,
counteract that little softer edge. Yeah,
it's very important to me that there's a consistency in the string tension because of my muscle memory. So,
yeah.
something I never paid attention to, but when you watch and listen, when you hear, not even the watch, when you hear yourself playing back, you're like, wow, I
Hmm.
bent that sharp. Why did I bend that sharp? And it's because I'm thinking of the guitar I'm playing, but I'm like, oh yeah, that had nines on it. I play tens. So of course,
Yeah,
muscle memory is just, you're used to like, this is how much strength you push, right? It's kind of like I had this horrible analogy, but I love it. It's kind of like when you think there's one more step and you do that, whoa, right? Because
yeah,
you're putting more
yeah.
pressure than you should. That's what happens. I have to be very aware of that. And so that's why, like I said, when I went to nickels or when I put nickels on guitars, I have to go up a gauge because, like you said, they are just more malleable. Like I can just bend
Yeah.
them a lot easier. And then all of a sudden, all my bends And it's not even, and this is what recording yourself teaches you. It's not even the actual tonal sharp, how to show. It's the speed of the note.
As
You
far as like how quickly you get a
yeah,
reaction
you
from
go
attack.
from you go from like
Yeah.
I'm gonna do a stupid thing, okay? Wow to wow. Like it's just
Yeah.
all of a
Oh,
sudden
I see.
you get so even if you are paying
Oh, yeah.
attention, you bend to pitch so much faster because of that. That's why I use that analogy of you think there's
Yeah.
one
Oh,
more
yeah.
step, or you think there's
Yeah.
something in this empty box when you pick it up. You have no idea. You're just bending. You're just used to a certain amount of, like I said, the muscle memory, or better, the tendon memory, whatever. On that note, I took you so much longer than what we talked about. I want to thank you so much for
Oh, you're
going.
welcome. Thank you, Phil. I'm glad it was enjoyable to talk to the legend.
Oh, you know, you're too kind. It's funny. I have a like experience. I usually when I do these with somebody, they always go, "Oh, I can't believe you're doing the background," because they see the show, the Friday show. I'm having that experience with you because this is where you guys usually sit for your background, is where you're sitting now.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I'm
Yeah.
like, oh, it's and I really mean that. I'll probably actually I will. So for the audience listening, I'm gonna not only send you a link to his put a link in the description to his website, which is important, but also to John's YouTube channel. I'll probably pick 3 video links specifically that I think are the first nerdy starts for where to go in your journey of your catalog of information. And then we'll end on this note. So you make a lot of different products. I would say, just as a starting point,
People should know too that everything we make is made to order, but it ships in a week. Humbuckers are overwhelmingly, and then P90s and Fender products. But our biggest sellers are really the first 4 we started with, which was the SLE 101, SLE 101 Plus. Um, Actually, those consistently bigger sellers, but we've introduced other models like the KZ 115, the ESG 102B. Those right now are top 4.
and then on your single coils on the single coil Strat
The
style.
single coils are T59 sets, very popular, and we've just released the Nocaster and Broadcaster, and they've pretty quickly become the most popular.
Your shop is 4 people.
4 people. It's me, Matthew Quayle, Paul Hudson, and Todd Dine, and all the pickups around won by actually primarily by Paul. Paul is and me. Paul and I are the two that do the winding, and but he has he at this point has the most experience on the variety of machines that we have of any person I think on the planet, because he's been doing this for me for years. That's another kind of unique thing. The, there's no other person I don't think alive probably that knows how to use all those machines and has as many hours on them as he does. I do all the Fender stuff and assembly of all the Fender stuff. Matthew does most of the P.A.F and P90 assembly. Paul does some too if we need that sort of extra people to do that. And Todd does our aging of part of the aging process for our covers, and he also packages up the strings.
On that note, guys, I want to thank you guys for your time, and till the next time, know your gear.